Okay, next let's do a little quick talk about lipids, especially biochemical lipids that we commonly use. First, let's talk about sphingolipids. So before, when we talk about lipids, we're generally talking about triglycerides. Those are those main lipids that we use to metabolize, right? Fats, when you think of fats, that is triglycerides. And these are the ones that are used in metabolism mainly. There are other types of lipids, actually multiple other types. The first one is sphingolipids. These are usually found on cell surfaces. They're used for signaling, recognition, the actual structure physically. The name sphingolipids derives from a unique backbone molecule that is found in all sphingolipids called sphingosine. And as you can see, this is what sphingosine looks like a regular fatty acid, except it has this unique backbone, which looks like this, essentially. This part is essentially what makes a sphingolipid a sphingolipid. Here in the bottom right, I actually put it in contrast. This is a triglyceride. Triglycerides have glycerol. That's why it's called, or diglyceride or monoglyceride. It would have glycerol attached to it, to its backbone. Whereas sphingolipids have instead this like weird thing instead of a glycerol. It's a little more complicated thing, but yeah. And then you can see this has R group. If there's R groups in H, it's called ceramide. Phosphocholine is called sphingomyelins, sugar, whatever. There are different names. You don't have to know this. If you want to, you can, but it's not important. Main thing, sphingosine looks like this. If there is a sphingosine in a lipid, it's a sphingolipid. Very simple, right? And that's compared to a glycerol, which looks like this, which would make something a glyceride. Okay. And sphingosines are not usually metabolized. They're usually used for cell signaling and similar to kind of like a phospholipid bilayer, right? Phospholipids are also a different class of lipids, but similar to phospholipids, sphingolipids are mostly for like cell signaling and recognition between cells. Another type of lipid that certain animals have in their bodies is called wax. Wax are also lipids, and they have an ester linkage connecting the chains instead of a glycerol or sphingosine backbone. Many plants have wax on their leaves, which prevents water loss and controls evaporation, just so the leaves don't dry out or get too wet, absorb too much water. Bees and other insects also commonly produce wax. That's why it's called beeswax. It produces wax part of the construction of their hives for like honeycombs, a lot of beeswax, right? It keeps like structural integrity. They look kind of like this, right? As you can see here, this has a bit of a unique backbone, which kind of looks like this. It's an ester instead of, again, a glycerol or sphingolipid. This one has an ester, which is a double bond O attached to a ether or a connecting like O, right? This on its own is called an ether, but when you have a double bond O here as well, it's called an ester. Okay. Well, another type of lipid that we want to talk about are called fat-soluble vitamins. These are actually very, very common in biology. You've probably taken some very recently as well. Fat-soluble vitamins either in your food or as supplemental tablets. These are very common vitamins, and they're called fat-soluble, and they're considered lipids, right? Because remember, if it's a fat, it's dissolved in fat, like dissolves like. There's water-soluble vitamins, which are dissolved in water, right? Because they're more polar. Vitamins A, D, E, and K are fat-soluble, whereas all of the vitamins B, so there's a bunch of vitamin Bs, all of the vitamin Bs and the vitamin C, those are water-soluble, they're not fat-soluble. Vitamins A, D, E, and K are fat-soluble. I'm not going to go into what all the vitamins do because they do thousands of things, and each one of them does different things. You don't really have to know all of the specifics of what each vitamin does. If it ever comes up, it'll come up in a passage on the MCAT, and they'll tell you what each vitamin does. But you do have to know that they are fat soluble. They say vitamin A, for example, vitamin E. They play a lot of roles, and they an important thing is that they tend to stay in the body for a long time. They're very hard to get rid of. Because of that, these types of vitamins can actually be very toxic if ingested in excess. That's why it's very, very, very bad to take a lot of vitamin A or vitamin K tablets. Those are very highly controlled, especially like some kids might, like little kids, obviously don't know any better. They might take a lot of vitamins A's and they can get poisoned actually off that. It can lead to things like blindness or vomiting, or possibly sometimes even death. Take too many. That's a trait of only fat-soluble vitamins. So for example, water-soluble vitamins like vitamin B and vitamin C, you can have pretty much an unlimited amount and it won't kill you, won't do anything to you, but fat-soluble are toxic at high levels. So yeah, just remember that. This is what vitamin A looks like. Right, again, just a regular lipid, but it has this, it's kind of like backbone, essentially. Instead of glycerol, sphingosine, or an ester, it has this kind of group. Okay. And I think, yeah, this is the last type of lipid that we want to talk about. It's called a prostaglandin. These are very small molecules, and they're released by actually pretty much almost all the cell types in your body can release prostaglandins. And they're released in response to injury or infection, and they begin the process of inflammation and clotting. Whenever you get injured, you get inflammation in that area, and you also get clotting in that area. That's started by these molecules called prostaglandins. Okay, again, always for lipids, the main thing to look out for, and the main thing that will usually be different is this part, backbone. This is what one for this one, alprostadil, which is E1 in the cycle. I don't believe you really have to know too in depth the inflammation process, but anti-inflammatories usually, when you take like a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug like Motrin, ibuprofen, whatever, Tylenol, they usually will target the production and like the kind of like the process of prostaglandins. So that this is kind of like what starts the whole inflammation and clotting process when you get injured or sick. Okay. And they're also lipids, of course. Okay, so hopefully that was helpful. Just to get a little bit more information about lipids, as well as some important syntheses and like organic chemistry stuff that you may have forgotten or wasn't covered in the previous lectures. Hopefully this helped. If you have any questions again, please feel free to email me. Otherwise, thank you very much for your time and have a great night.